Okay, so I wasn't even gonna talk about this series, but at this point, this is getting ridiculous. So the 76ers just lost to the Boston Celtics after they were up 3-2 in the series. And at this point, I'm not even surprised. In fact, I had Boston winning the series. I know that playoff predictions video that I made absolutely aged terribly, but this was one of those takes that I had that actually aged pretty well. I said Boston was gonna win in 7, and I said this was gonna be a great series. And despite the outcome of the series, I still believe my point does stand. But holy shit, I did not think Philly would fold like an omelet. I think it is very interesting that we talk about Devin Booker as a playoff choker or other players in the NBA, and I feel like Joel Embiid needs to be talked about in that conversation because Joel Embiid is a great player, there's no doubt about it, but this man just loves to fold in the playoffs. And listen, I love Joel Embiid, I'm glad he won the MVP, but Jesus Christ, he folded, and I don't even know what to say. And it's not like this is a one-time thing, this has happened multiple years. In fact, I'll always go back to that 76ers series where they lost to the Hawks. Everyone loves to blame Ben Simmons, and look, I'm not one to defend Ben Simmons, I think that's pretty obvious. But we're not gonna act like Joel Embiid did not play terrible towards the end of that series, and if you ask me, I would say he was one of the main reasons they lost. We can all scapegoat Ben Simmons, and at the time it was definitely justified, but no one really remembered how bad Joel Embiid was. And just like this year, despite Embiid playing good for part of the series, he folded at the end when his team needed him most. I'm not gonna be dumb and say he was the only reason why this team lost. Obviously, we have to look at Boston and say, damn, that's a really good team. Despite there being times where I actually questioned the possibility of Boston going out in the second round, which that was going to be a whole other video, but that's definitely getting delayed because Boston could damn near make it to the finals. Now, real quick, before I do transition into talking more about Philly, I do want to give my props to Boston. I know when I make these videos like, oh, this team played pathetic or this team folded, it's kind of disingenuous if I don't talk about the other team. Like, for example, in my last video, I talked about the Suns, and despite me talking bad about Phoenix, we had to give our props to Denver because Denver is a great team and they deserve their flowers. It would be totally disingenuous if I just said it was 100% blame to go to Phoenix. And in this case, I don't think Philly is 100% deserving of the blame. Honestly, my pick between the best team in the NBA was flipping between Boston and the Bucks. I know I predicted the Bucks to make the finals, but after like 2 games, I was like, shit, I'm not gonna lie, Boston might make it. And despite Boston having some struggles in this series and guys like Jason Tatum, they were able to pull it through. If I had to give you percentages on who was to blame for this game, I would say it's like a 730 or maybe 725 in favor of Philly. Now, I want to transition into Philly. I want to start with Doc Rivers, and look, I know it is such a thing to just blame every single NBA coach ever. Like, I mean, the Suns literally just fired Monty Williams yesterday because of their season, which I mean, in some ways is justified, but I could see why people think it's more of a scapegoat tactic. Now, with Doc Rivers, I think this is a completely different situation. I'm just gonna be completely honest. I think Doc Rivers is the most overrated coach in the NBA of all time. I don't think Doc Rivers is a good coach, and I know he won a championship, but do you guys remember that team? Like, if he didn't win a championship with that Boston Celtics team, I think we would have asked a lot more questions. And of course, he's respected around the league, I understand that, but is this like not something we need to look at? I mean, if we just look at the common denominator, every time a Doc Rivers-led team blows a lead, we gotta look at Doc Rivers. And I know the coach is not the entire makeup of the team, and Embiid didn't play the best, and James Harden didn't play the best, and other factors came into that. But at this point, is it not like kind of interesting just seeing like, damn, Doc Rivers is always at the head of blown leads? Now, do you go the Monty Williams route and just fire him? I really don't know. I mean, personally, I wouldn't have even hired Doc Rivers in the first place. But I get it, he's a respected coach in the NBA, and Philly was in desperate need of a coach at the time. However, looking at this now, I'm very interested to see in the offseason if Philly just decides to fire Doc Rivers, or maybe just trying to make the team better as a whole. I'm not really sure. But don't worry, Glenn, we're not here to just give you all the blame. We gotta talk about Philly as a team. I kind of already talked about Joel Embiid in the intro of the video, so I'm not really gonna go into too much detail, but I think Embiid has to start stepping up in the playoffs because this man is starting to be seen as a fraud by a lot of people, and there's nothing I can say about it. I will say this does prove my theory that you cannot win an NBA title with a center as your best player. Now, I know some people are gonna say, oh, what about Nikola Jokic? I think there's a complete difference between their play style. Nikola Jokic is basically a center playing point guard, while Embiid is a center playing a center. I think Jokic gets the excuse because he does other things other than just try to be the leading scorer. However, Embiid does not have the role of a playmaker, so that's why those two situations are different. Now, unless unless Embiid starts making these crazy passes and starts averaging like 10 assists per game, I don't see Philly winning a championship with Embiid as the quote-unquote best player. Actually, okay, I don't think best player is the right word. I would say leading scorer. And that's where we perfectly transition into James Harden. I don't know if people actually thought prime James Harden was just gonna reappear in this series. If you've been watching Philly this season, you can see there's a clear-cut difference with James Harden. James Harden is no longer this leading scorer, this guy that can average 30 points per game. He is a guy that is transitioned into a playmaker, and honestly, this might sound weird, but this has been my favorite version to watch. I've always said that James Harden's playstyle cannot win you a championship, and I'm still going to stand on that. However, this James Harden, I think, is the one version you could win a championship with. However, it's still James Harden, and his scoring ability is still something that's going to be looked at. I was very surprised that James Harden started off this series with 42 points, and then in game 4, this man had 42. But then just for the rest of the series, this man could barely score 15 points. It is confusing, and I don't know what it is, because I'm not going to say, oh, he can't do it. He can do it, but I don't know if he just chooses not to, if it's the offense. I couldn't tell you. Regardless, I think, and I know this is crazy to say, but Philly's going to need a little bit more. Okay, so the timing of what I just said could not be more perfect, because something just came out from a Joel Embiid press conference. He said, quote, "Me and James, we can't win alone. That's why basketball is played 5-on-5. We need everybody to find ways to be better." So part of me is saying, yeah, I think that's pretty true. I think every team could use a great starting five. But then there's a part of me that's thinking, wait a minute, weren't you guys like the worst players on the court? Tell me why Tobias Harris and Tyrese Maxey had more points than Harden and Embiid did. I mean, Harden didn't even score 10 points, and even PJ Tucker was playing pretty well. He only had 11 points, which was more than James Harden, but he shot pretty efficiently from the field. I mean, he is usually just a 3-and-D guy, so I think it's safe to say he played his role pretty well. Also, to just make things a lot worse, this man Ben Simmons posted a picture on his story of him watching the Celtics and Sixers game, which I'm not gonna lie is actually kind of funny. I know we're not really Ben Simmons fans on the channel, but that is kind of funny because this man is just kicking Philly down. Now, I don't know if this is good or bad news for Philly fans, so I'm just gonna say it, but from what I'm hearing, there is a possibility that James Harden could go back to Houston. I think for sentimental purposes, that'd be pretty cool to see, but as far as a basketball standpoint, I'm not entirely sure, but also they do have a new coach in Ime Udoka, so maybe Houston could work that out. But right now, we're talking about Philly, and Philly needs to figure this shit out. I think losing James Harden wouldn't be the worst thing in the world because he wasn't much of a scorer for you, as he was more of a playmaker. And I get it, his playmaking was important, but I don't think you need that right now. What I think Philly needs is more scores, that or letting Tyrese Maxey just develop more. In the next like 3 to 5 seasons, I do see a world where Tyrese Maxey is the second best player on that roster. As for the rest of this team, I'm not entirely sure what they can do. I would say trading Tobias Harris doesn't seem like the craziest of things because this man Tobias Harris is making a lot of money for what he does. And I get it, I like Tobias as more of a leadership guy, but as far as a starter goes, yeah, I'm not really the biggest fan of him. Regardless of Philly playing bad, I am interested to see how Boston can do. I think Boston has a great opportunity to possibly win the finals this year because if we break it down, I think them or Denver is the best team remaining. Also, before I end the video, I just want to tell you guys that on my podcast, we just dropped our second episode. If you guys want to check it out, it'll be right here on the screen, or I'll put it in the description, or hell, I'll even make it the pinned comment.